Welcome to WhatCannaRadio, where we bring a dose of reality to your conversations about hemp. We are proud to say that today's episode is brought to you by Joint Venture Pay and CBD Peer. Stick around to the end of the show to learn how you can increase the wellness of yourself and your business. My name is Aiden Washness. I'm happy to be your host today, and now enjoy the show. Hello, Paul. Thank you very much for joining us here on WhatCannaRadio. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm looking forward to today because I get to talk with you as a lawyer more about the legal landscape of where hemp stands, and then also for us to potentially break down one of the bills so that when somebody goes to look at them, they can better understand what it all really means, because it can kind of seem like a bunch of jargon and seem really daunting when you first look at it, right? Just a whole bunch of words on this page and page after page after page. And so it'll be really good for viewers to really get an idea of how you can really break one down so that they can, next time they want to go read it, they can be better educated themselves. And then also just kind of discuss like where CBD stands, for example, and other cannabinoids, or where hemp may go in the next few years, or also just why it takes so long for legislative bills to pass and laws to move forward. As we all know, we want hemp to change right now. We want it to be fully legalized right now, but it takes time for that to occur, and kind of break down why that really is. So for those that don't know you, could you tell a bit about yourself, who you are, what your background is, and how you came to the hemp space?
Of course, and thank you, Aiden, for having me first and foremost. My name is Paul Castillo. I am an associate at Ramon Law. I am part of our hemp and cannabis practice group, and I primarily focus on hemp. Serve several clients in California. Some have operations in other states, and currently assist other attorneys located in other states here at the firm with their hemp-related questions for some of their clients in those states as well. So we have a pretty broad and diverse practice. We also represent individuals internationally as well. So pretty broad in scope as far as kind of what we're able to assist with.
Absolutely, and that's very important. We need people like you guys to actually have an understanding of all the different minutiae between states. As we know, many different states have slightly different laws. Then also going internationally too, right? Internationally, you got many different laws going on there, and so it'll be really good to kind of get a better breakdown. And so, for somebody in the legal field, is there anything particularly about hemp that makes it more challenging for you guys than any other industry, for example?
Well, every industry has its challenges, but with respect to hemp in particular, I guess the regulatory uncertainty that we have within the space is probably the most difficult to work with. Anyone in the space knows it seems like every 6 months we get a curveball, right? Something else will come up, or we'll get some new interpretation. The DEA, for example, comes out with something, the FDA comes out with something, or a state regulator perhaps will, throw a wrench in there. So unfortunately, just since it is such a new industry and it's in its infancy, we don't have this long history of, case law and regulatory rulings that we can rely on. Whereas in other industries, alcohol or banking for that matter, whatever it may be, where you have hundreds of years of case law and statutory interpretation. Unfortunately, we simply don't have that. And given, I guess, what hemp is, it's essentially cannabis, right? Just with
Just the way I put it is that hemp and marijuana are the same. They refer to the same plant. They're just two legal classifications, right? That is simply differentiated by just one cannabinoid and the percentage of the content in the plant.
Exactly. So some of that case law relating to cannabis kind of crosses over into hemp, even though they are separate and distinct. It just creates a lot of confusion. So that is probably the most difficult aspect of all this, is the regulatory uncertainty. And it's a headache for lawyers, but more importantly, it's a headache for clients. It's incredibly difficult to run your business when the regulations are changing constantly, from one week to the next. It seems like, something is happening in this space. So it can be a challenging environment for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And now, in terms of the like the case logs and kind of how people have interpreted it over the many years for other industries, are you referring to like some, like you could look back on the interpretations and be like, all these people interpreted this law in this way, and so we kind of have this like basis to stand on, whereas right now like you couldn't really have a defense saying that all these people looked at this in this particular way, and now you're looking at it in this different way as whoever the other side is. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
It's more so for the like regulatory authorities, where the DEA is coming from, things of that nature. I think when they are looking at hemp in particular, they're looking at it through a cannabis lens, right? They just see this as a slight carve out, but it's still all within this cannabis, um, I guess, legal framework. Whereas we believe in the hemp industry, no, these are two separate and distinct plants, right? Of course, that was the whole point of the 2018 Farm Bill. No, hemp is not cannabis. It's now an agricultural commodity. It should be treated as such, so on and so forth. But from the regulators, I do think it is difficult for them to kind of make that distinction. I mean, at the end of the day, with the DEA in particular, I'm kind of going to pick on them. For them, it has to do with their jobs, right? They're trying to keep their jobs, so they're saying, no, we do need to be involved in the regulation of this product. It's hard for them to look the other way when their livelihood depends on it. So I do get where they're coming from and kind of why they're trying to interpret the current regulations in this manner. But I personally think it's unfounded, and all that will eventually kind of shake out through the legal system. But I think for them and other regulators as well, and I think even some legislators, writing these laws, they still see it as a cannabis light, so to speak, right? It is just cannabis, and they try to regulate it accordingly. So that's where I think a lot of confusion comes up, and a lot of kind of mixed signals on the regulatory side of things. So that's where most of that comes from.
Gotcha. Yeah. No. The transformation of these of hemp in the legal world is kind of fascinating because you look at things like, for example, psilocybin, right, was passed by the FDA for medical research. However, when you look at it, like that is just one single molecule, right? We may not necessarily know everything about it, but that's just one single molecule. Whereas when you take the cannabis lens into perspective, right, both hemp and marijuana, although now you have cannabis and hemp, right? Hopefully, at some point in time, it'll all just be cannabis and regulated into different markets. But when you look at it through that lens, right now we're only talking about THC and CBD in like the public's face, right? You have CBG and CBN and all these other cannabinoids, CBC and such, and kind of the more like lower levels where people are really nerding out on these kinds of things and getting into the industry space. But in terms of however far the public's eye can see into it, it's really just THC and CBD. But as far as we know, there's potentially over 200 different compounds, and so for a legislator to try to parse through all those things when we don't really have any research on this, right? We don't even necessarily understand like the endocannabinoid system and how that really functions. And so to say that we understand how THC and CBD function is already kind of a lie, right? Or it's a fudging of the truth. But then to also say that, oh, well, we also have all these other cannabinoids that when mixed together, they kind of become all these like different potential uses and different potential effects that they might have, right? So it's very challenging for a legislator to look at it when, A, they're not really super well educated on these topics, right? They have so many different topics that they need to be looking at. And so for them to take it down and kind of break all these things down, it's very, very difficult. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, of course, and I think it's difficult for consumers. It's difficult for individuals in the industry. I mean, as you stated, we simply do not know a lot at this point. But that's what makes it fascinating, right? We are learning something every day. These minor cannabinoids, that market is potentially huge. And how those cannabinoids impact the body, I think we can see great benefits from that. Um, but as far as regulating that, yes, that is incredibly difficult, especially this is a product and a plant that was essentially dormant for 100 years. We don't know much about it. And unfortunately, what knowledge we do have came through the illicit market. So when cannabis, had to go underground, most of that knowledge is kind of black market knowledge as far as, and not necessarily scientific, so to speak, but there's hippies in the Emerald Triangle that will certainly tell you what cannabinoids are good for what diseases, things of that nature. But unfortunately, that type of knowledge isn't in the public sphere. It's not being researched at Harvard and Yale and things of that nature. So until we get there, and I do think eventually we'll kind of see this path forward. But it is incredibly difficult for regulators and consumers to have an understanding of this plant and how it's going to impact them individually and kind of what they should be taking, what they shouldn't. Unfortunately, it's just so gray right now across the board. And as a lawyer, gray is good and bad. But right now in this space, it's very difficult to give hard answers. Like this is yes, this is no. Most of the time, it's like, well, maybe. So that creates just a lot of confusion for everyone.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I imagine, yeah, a gray area is beneficial for a lawyer, and not so great for a lawyer because you can kind of you can fudge around with play around with some things and not necessarily stuck to specific boundaries, but then at the same time, you're like you kind of left out in the void and just hoping that you'll find land at some point in time, which may or may never come. And so, kind of like with these pieces in mind, and maybe not necessarily just 100% on the hemp side of things, but just legislation in general. What really like everybody always wants things to change immediately, right? But at the same time, they like don't really want to go through the hassle of change. They want to have the results without going through the process of change, which is kind of crazy. But it makes sense, right? But in terms of like legislative realm, what really is the factor that makes it take so long for new bills to pass, for new laws to pass, to be written up, that kind of stuff?
I think it's just our legislative system, as a nation. So, right, we have the federal system and then we have the state system, but also within those states, we also have, county regulations or state regulations, or city regulations. So I know it varies across the board. And with something like this that is so new and regulators don't have an idea of it, I think there is a tendency to overregulate, right? We don't know what this is, so we need to be more cautious. So at the federal level, it's obviously difficult with the kind of bipartisan, or just partisan fighting that we have here within the Congress, right? But hemp is interesting in that it does make for kind of strange bedfellows. So you have a Republican, Mitch McConnell, who's very pro hemp, and he's one of the best hemp advocates that we have at the federal level. And he joins forces with his Democratic colleagues to try to push legislation that is pro hemp. And in that is helpful, and that does kind of move things forward. But still, hemp is such a minor issue for so many legislators. It's just difficult for it to gain traction. So I think when there is a real need and a real demand, legislative action happens more quickly. I think if legislators saw this as the kind of miracle plant that it is, I think they would be more inclined to get behind it. I mean, if you're a politician, it's hard not to get behind hemp, right? I mean, I understand the whole, oh, this is just we're trying to sneak in cannabis, or they're trying to use this to get high, this and that. I think that's kind of a dormant argument. I think that's kind of past. But as far as the benefits of the plant at all levels, right? For
Mm-hmm.
whether it be human consumption or hemp fibers for clothing or building or anything of that nature, it's just a very useful plant. So I think as legislators learn more, they'll start to get on board, hopefully a little bit. And then at the various state levels, I think it's the same problem, and maybe you don't have that kind of partisan infighting, but it's also they don't quite have a real understanding of the plant and kind of what its uses are, or kind of what it can be done. And in places where you do have like a heavy cannabis culture, with California in particular, sometimes there is kind of pushback from the cannabis community, just saying, "Hey, hemp is getting off easy here. Like, look at these regulations. You're treating them like tomatoes. No, that's not fair. We want more regulations on them." So at every single level, and that's true with most legislation, but hemp in particular seems to be very divisive as far as kind of where people stand. But unfortunately, this should be an easy political win, right? Everyone should be behind this plan, but for whatever reason, it does tend to be kind of a divisive issue, and and then that just kind of moves down the board, right? And then going back to the county, if you have an ag county that's, you know, has a little more rural, has a lot more agriculture, they're likely going to be more open to this because they see it as just another crop. And then, down to the city level, we've seen cities trying to enforce CBD bans and things of that nature. So it really just works its way all the way down the board to create an incredibly complex web of regulations where, you got the federal government saying, one thing via Congress and its legislation, and then you got the various federal agencies kind of coming out and saying another thing, and then that trickles down to the states where, state departments of health are starting to say something, state departments of agriculture are starting to say something, and then the counties get involved, then the county has to say something, and then cities start getting involved. So unfortunately, it just works its way down from the top and creates this kind of jumbled mess of laws and regulations that we currently have to navigate. And hopefully one day all of that gets worked out and we just have this great streamlined regulatory regime. I don't know how soon that will come, but hopefully eventually. And then kind of once we're there, I do think we'll see this more as an agricultural commodity. It will just be treated more like agriculture. I think the same is true for cannabis. I think eventually cannabis will be seen as an agricultural commodity as well. And hopefully it'll just be regulated within that framework, just up and down the board. Everyone's like, all right, it's simply a plant and we're going to regulate it as such, as opposed to this monster, I guess, that it's currently kind of demonized as.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's not exactly the same, right? Because, like, for example, THC that's produced in the plant is pretty much ready to be consumed right from there. But, like, for example, corn, right? It goes into your fuel, it goes into your sugars. You can even make alcohol from it, right? There's all these different ways that one thing. I mean, obviously, there's many different varieties of that one crop, but, like, it's, as far as I understand it, it's pretty much regulated as one crop, right? Depending on whether you're growing it for agriculture, or growing it for industrial use, whatever you might be growing it for, it's just regulated as one crop. And then the purchaser just chooses what seeds they want, and they purchase the product, right? And as opposed to, as we have it right now, all of the burden is laid on the farmers' hands, and the farmers are already struggling enough. And as you were kind of touching on, right, it's like it's amazing that politicians aren't behind it more than they already are, but it kind of also makes sense because, as you said, the education component is really major and it's so complex that even people that are in the hemp space, like, there's no hemp expert. A hemp expert just simply doesn't exist, right? You might have a hemp expert in the agricultural component, you might have a hemp expert in composites or textiles or food, right? Whatever it might be, but like everything's very disparate, and so to have the idea that you're going to educate a politician wholly on this is just kind of crazy. But at the same time, like, you have the cannabis side, right? And that kind of, as you were saying, plays almost two roles. You have the cannabis side of the people that don't like cannabis, and so they're saying that hemp is just like trying to sneak cannabis in. But then you also have the people that love cannabis, and they're just saying that hemp is either trying to push us out of the market, or they're trying to get all these benefits and rewards that we're not getting, right? And it's very fascinating to kind of see that, like, infighting specifically within the industry. But hopefully at some point in time we will kind of get a better idea. And so with this kind of all in mind, maybe we can touch on where the legislative like stance is now, what the legal landscape looks like now in the United States. Kind of maybe a little bit of history on it in terms of, like, the 2014 Farm Bill, right, and that sort of regulate or legalized things for research purposes, and then you have the 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized things for, like, more commercial use, right? And now you still have all the different bills kind of going into place, and the USDA has to come out with stuff, the FDA has to come out with stuff, all that kind of. So could you maybe just kind of give a little bit of history on it, and then where we're at now?
Yeah, so as you noted, the 2014 Farm Bill was kind of the big one, and that established state pilot programs. And hemp was available for research purposes for institutions of higher education. So colleges, universities, community colleges, they could get involved in these research projects. And under the state pilot program regime, essentially the idea was, hey, we're going to let these farmers grow it. We're going to kind of collect some data on it, kind of see where this thing goes, and then kind of make a determination from there. The 2014 Farm Bill was very successful in a lot of states. Several states had great success with the program, especially the early adopters, so places like Colorado and Kentucky. Those states were really able to get kind of a leg up on the industry just because they wholeheartedly embraced this legislation. They said, this is a great new crop. We can introduce it. This is going to be great for our state. And, just really ran with it, created regulations that were fair and were easy to understand, didn't try to over-regulate things. This kind of well maintained their quote unquote pilot programs, and it was great and it was beneficial. And I think due to that success, politicians, Mitch McConnell in particular, was very kind of headstrong in advocating for this plan, kind of pushing full legalization forward. So then we had the 2018 Farm Bill, which solidified that hemp is no longer to be deemed a controlled substance. So it is a completely separate plant, so to speak, or product from cannabis, and it is to be treated as such. It's supposed to be regulated as an agricultural commodity under the guidance of the USDA. Pursuant to that 2018 Farm Bill, they kind of had this grace period where we're going to have this kind of federal system that rolls out. Under that federal system, states are allowed to develop state plans where they kind of say, look, we want primary regulatory authority over this crop. Here's how we're going to do it. USDA put out guidelines. Your state plan must include XYZ, criminal background checks, GPS locations for, where the crop is going to be cultivated, things of that nature. And they submit that to the USDA. If the USDA, quote unquote, approves it, then they get to have primary regulatory authority. If your state chooses not to participate in this regime, you can obtain a license directly from the USDA. So that whole regulatory regime is still kind of shaking out. And just this past week, we had Congress, via the stopgap spending measure, actually extend the, I guess, pilot program regime under the 2014 Farm Bill for another year. So now we even have this kind of additional, I mean, some states were pushing for that. Some states wanted it because they didn't like this idea of these state plans. They felt they were too restrictive, whatever it may be. So they wanted some additional time to kind of work that out with the USDA. So that's good. But others are concerned that, look, this is just another year of kind of this legal confusion that we have, where we just kind of kick the can down the road. And now we have another year of this kind of odd licensing regime where some are going to be under, this kind of state pilot program authority. Others are going to be under state approved plan. Others are going to have nothing and be cultivating under some sort of USDA license. And it's just going to make kind of this jumble of, okay, is hemp cultivated under the old regime? Are you going to be able to transfer that hemp to a non-USDA approved state, or a state that does have an approved USDA plan? I would say yes. We can move hemp across state lines. It is considered an agricultural commodity. That shouldn't be an issue anymore. But you never know, you get some sort of overzealous law enforcement official or something saying, no, this isn't correct or this isn't right. And that, unfortunately, that's kind of just what we have, is just due to the uncertainty. There's people that kind of get overzealous in their enforcement of some of these regulations, and it just leads to headaches, honestly. And I think at the end of the day, we will see that it's going to play out fine. States that continue to go under this kind of pilot program regime, that is still going to be considered quality hemp in the marketplace, things of that nature. People are still going to want to buy hemp from those states. There's still going to be a kind of a need for it. But I do think we can have potential issues down the road where, again, just, overzealous enforcement, and something is going to come up. I'm sure of that, just given the way things have kind of played out to date. So something to keep an eye out for in the coming year.
Absolutely. And in terms of people kind of being overzealous about this, do you think it's really a matter that they're trying to protect themselves, and since they don't really know what's going on, then they're just like over enforcing it because maybe they'll be better off later on, whereas if they were to under enforce it and they maybe misinterpreted something incorrectly, then they'd be liable for it?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that, right? Kind of a CYA, right? Cover your ass. But I think there also is the whole "this is cannabis light" argument, right? And this kind of overzealous enforcement where they're like, no, these pot smoking hippies are just trying to get something by us. That whole kind of mentality unfortunately still exists, and it has kind of been a detriment to the industry. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is that if you can find some sort of way to stop the cultivation or the transaction of this plant, they're going to try to do that just because they feel that it is a dangerous substance, basically, for whatever reason that may be. They just kind of have this idea in their head that it is bad, and it shouldn't be used. And so if they can try to stop it, they will. And unfortunately, that just, again, creates more and more headaches for the industry, because every time a case like this comes up, then it either gets the idea in somebody else's head somewhere else that, hey, maybe we should be doing this, or it leads to, kind of additional advocacy on this side being like, no, we don't need to follow any of these rules, blah, blah, all these rules are stupid, blah, blah. So it's just, it just, again, more headaches, more confusion, more gray, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, the like the rebellious nature, right, versus the like regulatory nature is it's kind of always at odds because I mean, I'm sure definitely there's to some degree that you're having a bunch of lobbying power from other industries that don't want this crop to really succeed, right? But then at the same time, just this the slow process of regulation moving forward, the misunderstanding of all these different regulations in different states, and as you said, like maybe one cop busts, like there was that bust of trucking a bunch of hemp biomass between states, and like massive, like multiple tons of biomass was busted, and that like kind of spread out this whole thing where now a whole bunch of shipping companies are like fearful of using it. They're like, oh well, we can't actually use it, even though that in that one case, like it didn't actually really go anywhere because it technically was legal, but just the headlines got spread around, and now all of a sudden everybody has more gas to throw on the fire, and it's really it's interesting because I love the hemp space and I love the hemp community, right? And I love the cannabis community in general. But then at the same time, sometimes it can be kind of not negative to the industry, but it can definitely hurt it to some extent. That you have like people that are overzealous on the regulatory side, but then you also have people that are overzealous on the hemp side of things. And whether it's sharing a whole bunch of anecdotal evidence that it may be true, but there's a lot that we really don't know. And so if you're sharing all these ideas of what it could do, and you don't really know what it can do, then there's possibility that can hurt it down the line, or just sharing all these ideas and concepts of the as you said, the kind of um, like mystical plant or the miracle plant, right? Has all these possibilities. That just that term itself almost holds this concept that that's not possible, right? It's a miracle. Miracles aren't really possible unless you're in religion or whatever, right? And so it's kind of like this thing that's kind of thrown out. And so I find that like just that kind of like talk around it, whereas instead of saying, oh, it's perfect in every category and it does all these different things, maybe saying, oh, well, it has these certain uses and it can replace this thing in this case, but it can't replace this thing in this case, right? And just kind of like talking about it on a more rational level, and so it can kind of be hurtful on both sides. But that's just kind of it's interesting to see those two sides fighting it out, and then also since it is such a gray area, that can just be expanded to a much greater strength than it really was previously. Whereas if you actually had regulation in place, then you'd be able to make changes. But again, these things are going to take time. We're gonna have a lot of market driven forces. We're gonna have a lot of regulation driven forces, kind of like battling it out to see who wins on the other side. And so something that I really want to like kind of touch on, and I like to touch on in this podcast in general, are concepts that are well known but not really well understood. And I think one of those that's well known but not really well understood is the legality of CBD. Right? Obviously, we have all these other cannabinoids, and at some point in time, we're gonna have to regulate all those other cannabinoids. But right now, really, the only thing that's being regulated is CBD and THC. And so, CBD was like, as far as I understand it, it basically was removed from the controlled substances. It's not really considered in that drug category, but the same, like it's legalized, but at the same time, it's not really regulated to the point that it needs to be. And so like it's still kind of caught in the void, even though like it's allowed to find land when it can hit land, but it doesn't really know where that land sits, right? And so could you kind of like break down what it really means to say that CBD is legal, and if it really is legal?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's one that comes up often, right? Everyone in the industry is kind of looking for answers as to that. So one important distinction is CBD can be found in both, cannabis or marijuana and in hemp. So as long as it is hemp derived, yes, CBD is lawful, is not subject to the Controlled Substance Act. But if the CBD is cannabis derived, then that CBD would be considered a controlled substance. So that little nuance right there is, I think sometimes it throws people off, but it's important to remember this distinction. We are only talking about hemp-derived CBD. So that is big right there. And with respect to its legality, yes, hemp-derived CBD is legal. It got it. Cool. So, okay. Hey, great question. Yes, so the issues surrounding CBD are one of the biggest headaches in the industry. It's something, we speak of constantly, and there tends to be a little bit of misinformation out there. So, yes, CBD derived from hemp is legal. It is a lawful cannabinoid, and it is not to be considered a controlled substance. But one distinction there is that CBD derived from cannabis would be considered a controlled substance. So there's a little bit of confusion in there. So it does make a difference where the CBD is being derived from. That is the biggest sticking point. Um, and as stated, CBD derived from hemp is lawful. It is a lawful cannabinoid, is not subject to the Controlled Substance Act. However, the FDA has stated that CBD is not safe for human consumption. They provided, reasoning for that. Essentially, CBD is used in an approved medication. So they have taken the position that since it is used in a medication, it is kind of a restricted substance, so to speak. And they also don't have much information about CBD as well to kind of make the determination that it is, the term that is used is grass, generally
Yeah.
approved as safe.
I just want to ask a quick note here. So you're saying the whole aspect that it's regulated as a pharmaceutical already, and my rough understanding of this is that if you were to basically break it down into like three categories, you have pharmaceutical standards, you have nutraceutical standards, and you have food standards, right? And so like if something has been regulated as a pharmaceutical standard or a nutraceutical standard, they won't like move it back down. Or if they've been regulated as a pharmaceutical standard, they won't re-regulate it as a nutraceutical standard. But however, as my understanding is, there's also kind of there's a piece of the law that says that if somebody decides to, they could potentially re-regulate it as a different category. So is that kind of
The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FDA does have authority to kind of regulate it as they see fit, essentially. So they could not place these restrictions on it. However, they've taken the position that since it was used in a pharmaceutical product, then it's kind of going to be under that kind of regulatory regime that you spoke of there. So that is in part why it's currently being regulated as it currently is. There has been some talk of fixing that at the legislative level, whether Congress passes something saying specifically that, CBD in particular is safe for human consumption. Um, that is kind of left in the wings, so to speak. We hear talk of that. We'll see if anything ever comes of it. I'm hopeful for something like that to pass. Otherwise, I think eventually the FDA will come around. They do have they've had these various comment periods, things of that nature. It does seem as if they're interested in hearing from the industry. But as you know, CBD is everywhere. So even though the FDA has stated, it's not safe for human consumption, that has not stopped production at all. Every once in a while, we kind of get these cease and desist letters from the FDA to these various CBD companies, but that's typically we only see that when these organizations are making claims regarding the health benefits of their product in particular. So if you're out there saying that your CBD cream cures cancer, that's going to raise some eyebrows over at the FDA. So that is kind of where we've seen the enforcement actions taking place to date. And enforcement has been kind of limited. It's not like we're seeing federal agents coming in and destroying shipments or things of that nature. For the most part, it's just kind of been these cease and desist letters. We have seen consumer actions being brought kind of in the private sphere here where, we're just bringing actions as private individuals against these companies for some of these claims that are being made. But unfortunately, the statements coming out of the FDA, fortunately, I guess, don't have much teeth, right? There isn't much enforcement. As stated, there's CBD products everywhere, from creams to gummies to, chewing gums, teas, pretty much you name it, there's CBD in it right now. So there is this real disconnect as far as what is coming out from the regulators and what's actually happening in the marketplace. And I think that disconnect has become so wide now that the FDA simply can't just bury their head in the sand, so to speak. They're going to have to address this. They're going to have to, I don't even know if they're going to regulate it in a manner that is, kind of coming up with dosage limits or something like that. I'm not sure how they're going to go about it. My request would be just treat it as any other sort of agricultural product. I mean, at this point, I think it's kind of safe to say that it is safe. We don't see that it's having adverse effects on people. And I think it kind of should be treated as such, something similar to, I don't know, lavender or something of that nature. I don't know, just any other plant-based, substance that is kind of used in kind of various forms. I'm hoping it goes that route. But we'll see. The FDA issue is incredibly complicated. There's many individuals that are far more well-versed in it than I am, and they go toe-to-toe with the FDA over these issues. So we'll kind of leave it to the experts. But as far as kind of general understanding, just know CBD derived from hemp is a lawful cannabinoid. but the FDA has taken the position that it is not safe for human consumption. And then on the state level, then it kind of varies. We have kind of a great variance from state to state. So California, where I'm at, they have taken the same position as the FDA. They've said hemp derived CBD is not safe for human consumption. You cannot put it in food products. Again, that stopped absolutely no one, and it is everywhere. But nonetheless, we had the California Department of Health issue a FAQ statement where they basically said, no, you cannot be adding hemp-derived CBD or other cannabinoids into food products. And then you have other states like Colorado, for example, that essentially just says, hey, hemp is a lawful agricultural product here. We're not going to place any restrictions on it. You do have to put this disclaimer on your products, essentially stating that, the FDA has not approved this as safe. I forget the exact language, but there's kind of a statement you have to use.
Is it basically the same statement that you put on like all nutraceutical products?
Essentially, this one is kind of hemp specific. So,
Gotcha.
Well, I got it. What do we got? Pull it up here. So, the product must be clearly labeled as containing hemp and CBD if applicable, including a not tested by FDA for efficacy and safety statement, and not make any health claims. So that is directly from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And they go on to further state, we regulate CBD derived from industrial hemp as either a food ingredient or as a nutritional supplement. We don't currently place age restrictions on who can purchase, consume, dose, or ingest these products, except when it's combined with other age-restricted commodities, i.e. alcohol or marijuana products. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a great regulatory approach. The way Colorado went about it, I think, we could learn a lot as other state regulators and the FDA as well. Just saying, look, it's pretty much an ag product. As long as you're not mixing it with booze or something else of that nature, then hey, we don't see any problem with it. I'm hopeful that that's the direction we're going to head as far as regulations are concerned. But I think each time that we have kind of a new cannabinoid that's the hot one, unfortunately, I think we're kind of going to continually run against these problems. So whether it's, CBG or CBN or Delta 8 or anything of that nature, like every time we have a new cannabinoid, unfortunately, we just kind of keep running into the same kind of regulatory trap, right? Is this legal? Is it not legal? Like, we just need something kind of across the board as far as, yes, any hemp-derived cannabinoid, we can place it in food or something of that nature. And I think the big change will eventually come when, fingers crossed here, cannabis is federally legalized. I do think the whole regulatory landscape is going to shift. I don't know if it's going to be better necessarily. I think there's going to be a lot of gray again once we get cannabis in the mix. But I do think we'll finally kind of move away from this individual cannabinoid system where it's like CBD is bad, THC is bad. No, all these other cannabinoids, well, we don't even know about those. So we're not even going to talk about them. And then just, creates more confusion. So that's kind of where I'm hopeful things will go. But at this point, yes, CBD is lawful, just per the FDA and per some state agencies, don't put it in food. And that is kind of the quick and dirty of it. But again, that's a business decision because as we see in the marketplace, it is everywhere. So and don't make health claims as well. Don't say your CBD product is going to cure cancer and, maybe you'll be all right.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole idea of going through each individual cannabinoid and trying to figure out regulations for each one, I mean, we'd basically be stuck here for decades, if not more, potentially centuries, right? If we have over 200 different cannabinoids and we have to research each one individually, I definitely think that going with the approach of hemp-derived cannabinoids or cannabis-derived cannabinoids are just like allowed, accepted, but then maybe like specific ones like THC or potentially down the road, I don't know if like CBN, like the thing is that I find interesting is that right now we only have THC being regulated as a recreational or medicinal substance, right, in terms of the its psychoactive components. However, there's other cannabinoids out there like CBN that have bits of psychoactive components. I'm sure we'll find other ones down the road, and like whether or not those will be regulated as a recreational or medicinal use versus being regulated as more of the consumer friendly and just like general use. And it's kind of it's such a it's just crazy to try like handle all these different components. And then also, as we were saying, like all the different states are different, right? Like for example, for like smoked flour or smokable flour, like Kentucky is like, oh, you can grow it here, you just can't sell it here. So you can sell it in other states that allow for it to be sold, but you just can't sell it here, even though you can grow it here. And it's just all these different things are just kind of crazy. Like New York is kind of similar with that in terms of like the medical side. Although I think they're starting to open it up. They're now allowing like pre-rolls and that kind of stuff for the medical marijuana. But like smokable flower was kind of off the table for the longest time, and it's just really interesting to see all these like differentiating factors and trying to like navigate through it. And so for a business that like maybe a business that's just in one particular state, they already have enough of a headache dealing with it there. But then if they decide that they want to move to another state or expand their business, then that's just they maybe have to have different SKUs for different states, right? Which is just like incredible headache. You already have to have somewhat different SKUs for different countries, but now that you have to have different SKUs for different states, when really we should be targeting working. I mean, obviously every industry has state by state regulations and state by state competition, right? And so everybody's kind of like competing against each other. But this, all overall, we're really the United States competing against other global entities, right? Versus like individual states competing against global entities. When that's not really possible. And so kind of like on the business lens of things, right? Maybe targeting specifically like a CBD business because, for example, I'm in the fiber industry, a little bit in the grain food and food products, but mostly using grain for industrial products. And so for us, it's not super easy because we still have people that are not really well educated on the topics, and you still have some law enforcement, right? Like I actually went and spoke with some police officers a while back, like a year ago, talking about hemp, and I was like, oh, trying to tell them that like my land, because I was growing hemp back then. I'm not growing hemp anymore, but we were growing hemp, and when I walked in, they didn't even know that hemp was legal. They were like, oh, it'd be so great if you could legalize it. And it's like, yeah, it's been legal for like the last 4 years. What are you talking about? And so it's just like there's lots of like kind of miscommunications, and people aren't really informed on every single level. Obviously, again, there's so many things that people have to worry about on top of hemp that hemp is just kind of brushed away to the side. But anyway, but going back to like the CBD aspect of things, for people that are in the CBD industry, I think they have even a harder time dealing with all this stuff, because for us, it's really just getting people past the idea that we're not using CBD or cannabinoids for fiber products, and most of it's going into industrial products. But for the CBD world of things, right, they're really stuck. And so because it is, we touched on multiple components here, but because it is kind of an ever-changing landscape, and it seems like it's solidifying, starting to, but it's going to take a while before it really is solidified. How can a business really kind of prepare themselves to maybe not necessarily know 100%, like we're going to have to deal with all these challenges, and these are the challenges we're going to have to deal with, and we have to prepare for those ones specifically, but just kind of prepare themselves so that when maybe new regulations do come out, they have an easier time pivoting versus just getting smacked off the shelves and they go bye-bye from there.
I mean, with respect to CBD, it is difficult just because, as you noted, the regulation is kind of constantly evolving. But I think first and foremost, it's one, understanding the complications in the regulatory space. So just knowing that, hey, I'm going to deal with headaches. If I'm going to be in this space, that's kind of the nature of the game, right? I'm going to have to deal with this. I'm going to have to deal with these FDA statements, whatever they may be. Two, I think it's an understanding of kind of what you want to portray your kind of product as, and ensuring that it is kind of labeled and identified correctly. So there are steps that you can take. Say you want to make more of kind of a supplement type product. The FDA does have labeling guidelines for supplements. So even though they've had these statements regarding CBD and whatnot, there still are labeling laws that are applicable to supplements. So just trying to market and label your product accordingly. That's just say, hey, if the FDA comes out tomorrow and says, it's fine in a supplement form, I want my packaging to already be, compliant. So I think that's a great step that you can take. And then two, also just having a strong understanding of, are you going to be operating in this state? What are your state's kind of regulations with respect to hemp and CBD? And if you do plan on kind of expanding your operations into different, states and jurisdictions of that nature, just being aware that what works in your state may not work in another one. And I guess the biggest one, do not make any health claims with respect to your product. I think that's one of the biggest ones with hemp. I think on the kind of the hemp side over here as advocates, we're very pro hemp, right? It's kind of a cure all. Hemp will fix it. If you're suffering from something, throw some hemp cream on there or something. Your joints will feel better. But I do think, at the end of the day, we do need to be very careful with those claims, because whenever you're making health benefits with respect to your product in any sphere, um, there can be real consequences for that. You can obviously hurt your business enterprise, but also hurt consumers, right? If you're making claims that um, I don't want to say are untrue, but maybe half truths, things of that nature, where there's not much verification there. I mean, that's bad for business, bad for consumers, bad for everyone. So really, just knowing your product, understanding, hey, there are going to be regulations, and following the rules the best you can given this complex system that we're operating in. And I think if you follow those, you're going to be all right in trying to navigating this kind of ridiculous, crazy landscape that we got going on right now.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Just being prepared for knowing that you're going to be running into a bunch of roadblocks and a bunch of hurdles, and then also, as you said, using regulations that are already existing, right? Like the nutraceutical regulations that you have to label them in a certain way. If you have to use GMP manufacturing standards, that kind of stuff, right? And so just like doing those little pieces so that the regulators can't come and like try to cut you down at the limbs or at the trunk based on these other things that you're not following, because even though maybe you are following the cannabinoid side as best as you can, right? And so just kind of following as many other regulations that already exist as possible, even if they're maybe not directly being applied to the cannabis space, but they can be applied to the cannabis space. And then kind of going from there, and yeah, just again knowing that you're going to run into all these hurdles, because it's so fascinating. I mean, I'm seeing it a lot less now, but I'm sure you saw a lot kind of early on. All these people trying to get into the cannabinoid space, being like, "Oh, I'm going to be a millionaire overnight. It's going to be so easy. I'll just put some plants in the ground and I'll be growing money." And it's like, well, when you really get into it, like, yeah, if you're just being a grower, maybe you can kind of move forward from there. But like getting into processing, I mean, I know a bunch of processors that if they really want to be legit, they want to have all their standards in place. They want to make sure that they're following all safety regulations and all codes and everything. They're looking at potentially like $10 million plus to have startup revenue in order to build the facility, get all the systems set up, make sure all of the paperwork is done, make sure you have all the certifications done, make sure you have the right kind of manufacturing equipment. And that's before you even think about getting to developing a product and then putting that product on the market, right? So there's a lot of kind of bottlenecks that already go into that before you even think about having to deal with the regulations, because all that is just a whole bunch of other craziness that goes on with it. And so kind of again on this business kind of sense approach, one of the biggest things, it's changing to a degree as new companies come out with different policies, but one of the biggest things that people have a difficulty with is advertising, right? I mean, like trying to approach an advertiser, especially if you're trying to go with like social media, going with Google AdSense or Facebook or whatever. You go in, you try to get an ad placed, and then they flag you automatically just because you had hemp in the name, and that's just categorized as marijuana. And then you try to make a claim, and even if you happen to get to a person, which is very unlikely, you're more likely to deal with a bot, but even if you happen to get to a person, that person's just going to be like, oh, well, you violated our policies, and that's basically how it stands. And so I know some people have been able to push through and get to the point where they can actually advertise, but they had to approach people with their lawyers, right? And so short of approaching somebody with your lawyer, which I'm sure at some point in time you'll have to do, but what could a company do? Like, what could they potentially say to these advertisers to allow them to kind of get through a little bit easier, if it's even possible?
Monster in and of itself. But I think one, being sure that your claims or just your product is being advertised truthfully. Is this a hemp derived product? Is it a CBD isolate or something of that nature? Or is it kind of maybe like a full spectrum oil type product? Kind of what are the basics or the basis for kind of the product makeup, right? We'll just use a cream, for example. Is this some kind of lotion that you just infused with kind of CBD isolates? Or is this kind of a broad spectrum hemp oil that you blended into this cream? Just kind of one, making that distinction as to what your product is, instead of just saying CBD cream or something of that nature. Just knowing that it is, properly identified as kind of what it is. And then two, I guess being honest as far as not trying to have some sort of, I don't want to say gimmicky, but I have seen some advertising almost trying to link it to cannabis, as if this is kind of like a cannabis light product or something of that nature, as if it's kind of I don't know, risque, so to speak, or something, that this is, kind of like an off-brand cannabis. This is a way to kind of get around the regulations or something. I would advise kind of advertising your product in that manner, and just promoting it in a way that is truthful. Again, not making health claims, things of that nature. Not saying it cures cancer. Not saying it does anything else, or even I do see a lot of, I guess, kind of linking to studies that say this or that about hemp or cannabis, which is great. And we do need those studies, and we do need to know more about these type of products and things of that nature. But unless your product was specifically involved in that study, I mean, I wouldn't be linking it to, other kind of medical literature or things of that nature. And those are just kind of basic steps you can take. And again, it really is going to depend on the platform. Um, Sometimes hemp is kind of the red flag right there. So some people will say, herbal or plant-based or something of that nature, kind of a plant-based cream. You can go that route as long as you are kind of following the other guidelines and things of that nature. So it is advertising, unfortunately, is kind of a beast. And I do know some state legislatures are also kind of talking about it. Don't know off the top of my head right now if there's anything in place, but I certainly have seen, age restrictions, things of that nature, advertising restrictions, how these type of products can be advertised. Obviously, you can't be marketing to children or things of that nature. So, while it is difficult, I think there are just kind of some general practices that you can take to kind of limit the burden, so to speak, if you.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great answer, because it's at some point in time, you probably, until the policies and regulations around it really do change and solidify, you're probably going to have to approach them with your lawyer, or you're going to have to find other ways of marketing your product. And I mean, there's many other ways out there, right? There's like influencers. There's you can go on your local radio. You can be put in the newspaper, all that kind of stuff. Places that aren't necessarily as corporatized as like Facebook or Google or whatever, that are so automated. They only have like 40,000 people monitoring billions of people, so it's kind of challenging to even think about doing that. And so do you want to kind of move on to the going over the legislative bill and kind of breaking down what it really means to do that? All right, well. Like many in this world, I deal with anxiety. It can interfere with my work, my relationships, and my ability to socialize. This becomes a feedback loop where my lack of progress in human interaction can lead to further anxiety. So how does one combat this? Well, I personally use cannabidiol, or CBD. While we can't yet clinically say CBD treats anxiety, for myself and many others I know, CBD can help me feel far better. The only issue is it's so expensive, and for many, it's very challenging to find a high-quality product. Well, thanks to today's sponsor, CBD Peer, we at WhatCannaRadio can offer our listeners a 15% discount on their world-class, US-sourced, organically grown CBD products, ranging from CBD oil to CBD cream. Use our discount code WCD, that's WCD, at checkout to get your 15% discount. We appreciate your support, and we hope you appreciate yourself. Like many in the hemp and marijuana spaces, it can be challenging to find a payment processor that will work with you or even know what challenges you face, which makes it difficult to be confident that you can grow your business successfully. Because as everyone who has even a little bit of business savvy knows, you need to be able to take payments from your customers. Because even though we all want to change the world, money is still king. Thanks to our sponsor, Joint Venture Pay, we at WhatCannaRadio can offer our listeners the opportunity to work with a leading payment processing firm who's not only expert in the payments world, but is also very knowledgeable in the hemp and marijuana spaces. Their job is to be your solutionist, someone whose job it is to solve your problems. The cannabis world is constantly changing, and your solutions need to change with it. There is no one else like Joint Venture Pay when it comes to dealing with these adaptations, thanks to their multi-solution approach. So do yourself and your business a favor and choose Joint Venture Pay as your savior. Please contact us at contact@whatcannado.com and tell us you choose Joint Venture Pay. We appreciate your support and hope you appreciate your business. And now back to the show. Okie dokie. So yeah, so this is State of New York. I'm pretty sure we've updated this and now there's a new bill in place, but this is kind of what was the reigning component for a while, and so I think it'll just be a good place to start. Are you able to see it? Okie dokie. Oh, perfect. Cool. So yes, sorry, you go ahead. I was just gonna say basically just like kind of. We don't actually have to go into all the nitty gritty of the bill, but just kind of like breaking down some of the components of it and better understanding, like just simply like for example, what do the numbers mean on one side, or like what do different sections mean? Just kind of ways that somebody could look through it and not just as I was saying earlier, just like see a whole bunch of words and just be totally confused. Anyway, so you can take it away.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to numbers on the side, that's just kind of a referencing point, right? So you can say kind of page 3, line 18, or whatever it may be. So that just kind of helps for referencing. As far as New York in particular, as far as their kind of bill drafting, it can be a little difficult at times, just because as you can see, if we go down a little bit, kind of the red strike through. So what they are doing there is this is stuff that was struck from the old law. So it can be a little confusing as to be like, well, why is there all these red lines all throughout this thing? So that is basically just saying, hey, this is what it used to state. We are striking that now. That is no longer applicable. And everything in green is applicable. So green means go, red means, gone, basically.
Gotcha. So is it basically that like the black is the original bill, the red is what was struck out from that original bill, and the green is what was added to the new bill?
Exactly. So the black is kind of what is the law, right? So it says, section subdivision 1 of section 105 of the agricultural and markets law. So basically what the laws are on the books, that is going to be, what's kind of already there via the black. As you stated, green is what we're adding and red is kind of what we are taking out. Um, Whenever you're trying to go through these for the first time, it's difficult. Like you said, you just see all these lines, all these words, there's strike through, and there's all these, it just seems like a jumbled mess, and they're referencing other code sections that aren't listed here. Personally, for me, I always just try to go through at least once, just a quick overview, being like, hey, what are we even talking about here? Um, and if you go down, well, if you just kind of start here, it is kind of if you just kind of go through the first line, right? Um, Industrial hemp means. So if we're just going here, section 1. So okay, we're defining hemp. This is how we're going to define it. Yeah, exactly. Going right there. Grow, sale, distribution, transportation. Just okay. This section we're going to be talking about that stuff. Things of that nature. And then if you go down a little bit, because I think, yeah, let me try to get to the page for you. If we go down to, let's see, page 5, line number 39. So right here, Article 29A. So right here, we're coming up with essentially a whole new addition to the agricultural markets law. We're coming up with a whole new section here. And this is always helpful when you're coming up with something new, is just knowing kind of the section breakdown here. So right at the top, that's very nice. So we know here, we go to 520, we're going to be seeing definitions. 521 is going to go to their rulemaking authority, so on and so forth. So we're going to see, in section 522, we're going to talk about hemp extract licensing. Okay. 528, we're going to know the fees that are going to be involved. Are there going to be limitations on licensures? 530, how do I renew my license? 531. So it's, for me personally, I always find it very helpful to kind of just get an idea right from the jump, right? What am I getting into with this particular regulation? What is going to be kind of mapped out here? Is there anything that I'm not seeing in this section? Is there something that is relevant to me that I don't see here? Maybe it's, you thought this was going to be about a cultivation or something of that nature, and it says, well, does cannabinoid grower license kind of apply to me? So then you just kind of go directly to that section, see if it does apply, and then kind of move around from there.
So this is kind of like the table of contents for the bill.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So kind of use this as your roadmap to kind of get into the law itself. And I think if we just kind of go to the first section here, 520, definitions. That's always one of the biggest, right? How are we defining this? What are we going to identify a hemp extract as? And as you can see, we have a very, kind of broad definition. And the beauty of one thing I personally like with respect to this legislation is that we do have this broad language for hemp extract. So we didn't necessarily call it a CBD extract, right? the legislature here didn't limit themselves to only focusing on CBD. It is all, cannabinoids that are going to be extracted from the hemp plant. So under this regulation, given that they had such broad language involved, we can regulate things like CBN, CBG, Delta 8 that's derived from hemp. So I do think it is, give the legislature a shout out there that they did a good job of kind of using this broad and all encompassing language so that we won't have to be coming back to this and changing definitions and things of that nature every time there is a hot new cannabinoid out there. We just kind of have this broad language. Hemp derived extracts are just going to be regulated in this manner, whether it's CBD or kind of otherwise. So I do think that is very important. And that's one of the nice things, kind of reading through this legislation, that I found very helpful. That, again, shout out to the legislature there. And I do think, kind of just going through here, they are specifically talking about, they're making the distinction between a grower, a manufacturer, and an extractor. And I think, we kind of go through these. Yeah, if we go down a little bit here. So as you see, definition, 3, that's going to be a reference to growers. 4 is how we're going to define manufacturer, and 5 is how we're going to define extractor. So we do have kind of this distinction between the 3 kind of components that is kind of going to go into these hemp extracts, right? And it is a little complicated. You're like, well, am I a manufacturer or am I an extractor? Kind of where am I going to fall? And I think, we just kind of have to go through it individually. What are the products? What is your processing going to look like? What are you trying to do? And just kind of, okay, where do I fall? What type of license do I need? Things of that nature. That is helpful. And then as you continue to go through and you kind of see here in particular, so if we go down to section 539, we're going to talk about something that we touched on a bit, advertising. So hold on. We got it. And again, it just, as you said, it looks kind of like a jumbled mess, right? You're just kind of scrolling and scrolling. That's why that table of contents at the beginning is just so
very helpful.
So you're not trying to keep going through everything. Oh, where is this? Where is that? So just there you go. So 539 advertising. The department shall promulgate rules and regulations governing the advertising of hemp extract and other relevant products or services as determined by the mission. So they kind of punted the issue there, right? They're like, we'll come up with regs later. But nonetheless, it is in there. So as a individual that wants to operate in New York, that there will be regulations on advertising forthcoming. So while they are not clearly laid out in this particular legislation, at least you have an idea that, well, eventually the department is going to come out with some sort of statement. So I need to be aware of that. So gotcha. while it is difficult to kind of go through, line by line and try to figure out what this means, I think from just kind of a layperson perspective, when you get something like this, when you're, okay, I want to get into hemp, I want to become a, processor or whatever it may be, just try to take a step back, look at the regulations, kind of go to that, table of contents, so to say, what do I think will apply to me first and foremost, kind of look over those provisions, kind of get an understanding, okay, I think I fall in this category, I think my product would be regulated as such, and then kind of going back again and kind of reading through it piece by piece. Well, it is difficult, and your eyes kind of gloss over, kind of going over all this stuff, right? You're like, oh, whatever, this is so dumb. I think if you do take it kind of piece by piece, what applies to me? Is this section going to be relevant to my operations? And if you don't think it is going to be, then, you can kind of pass over that and have a lawyer deal with it later, but at least get a general understanding of, okay, I think this particular code section is going to, apply to me, or the licensing structure as a whole. This is how we're going to issue licenses, or there's going to be a certain number of licenses. All of those type of things, I think, are kind of quick and dirty kind of points that you can get to, where you can look to this quickly and efficiently without having your head explode, right? Where if you try to just go through, especially something like this, where it's pretty dense, and we have kind of both regulations in one, where we have kind of hemp cultivation and processing kind of lumped together in this one bill that was passed, right? So we have pretty much everything hemp related, which is nice because it's all there in one place, but maybe a large portion of it doesn't apply to you. So trying to go through this line by line and read and understand everything. I mean, trust me, as an attorney, I can tell you For myself, I try to read through the whole thing once, just try to wrap my head around it. Hey, what are they trying to get at? Try to go through again, just trying to see what do I think is going to be applicable to kind of what I'm looking at, whether it's my client or any particular issue. And then going through a third time, really trying to get it in detail to see if there's anything that I kind of missed. But that is a difficult exercise to say the least. Again, this is like reading 14 pages out of a phone book. So I think it really is important to just kind of look at the headlines and say, all right, what am I looking for specifically for this particular instance? Where can I spot it? Am I having trouble spotting it? And then just kind of going from there. Sometimes it depends on the legislature. I know at least at the federal level they do this. They'll have kind of a near the end of the bill or whatever that was passed, a short summary. So sometimes you can kind of find a summary or breakdown of the various sections, and those can be very helpful as well. But I do think it is important to go directly to the regulations and give it a try yourself, right? Try to go through these, try to understand, try to read through the definitions, understand kind of what they're trying to get at, and then kind of go to this third-party information that is often posted online. So we do have a lot of commentators on hemp. A lot of people in the legal profession, provide regulatory updates via blog posts, things of that nature, and that can be a great resource. But at the end of the day, it's important for you to have an understanding as well of the regulations in question, and just say, okay, obviously, once you get down to it, and you kind of go through the licensing process, likely you are going to have to hire legal counsel. This is kind of difficult to kind of go it alone. But I do know of people that have kind of done it and been successful in their enterprises. But it's very difficult, to say the least, to try to get through all of this without legal assistance. But there are some steps you can take to just, get a basic understanding of kind of what you're getting yourself into. And I think this is a good starting point. And then go to the third-party information. So try to read it for yourself. Get an understanding, kind of a bare bones, even though it does seem to be this big, giant, jumbled mess. It's like, all right, what is a cannabinoid permit, right? Like, what? I got to get this permit, right? And it's like, oh, no, that's only going to be for retailers, wholesalers, and distributors. And you're like, okay, well, if I'm not a retailer, wholesaler, or distributor, I likely don't need this cannabinoid permit. So things of that nature. And then going to these third-party sites, or this third-party information, and just saying, yeah, that coincides with what I read. Okay, that makes sense to me. After I read through the regulations, okay, that does make sense. Or maybe you'll read something from something published by a third party and be, whoa, I didn't read that at all. Where are they getting that from? So then, either you check that third party site, or again, go back to the bill and just say, oh, okay. Hopefully the third party that's providing the information will have citations. So typically they would say, section 539 or something related to advertising. A lot of times this third party information will have citations to the direct, provision, and then that can also help guide you as well. But while it is a daunting task to go through all of this, and that's the whole reason we went to law school, to try to piece through these bills. At the end of the day, if you kind of break it down, look what is kind of applicable to you, I do think that's kind of a good starting point. But at the end of the day, once you start kind of getting into the industry and trying to piece together these regulations, it can be incredibly difficult, just because many of these code sections reference additional code sections that aren't printed in the particular bill or whatever it may be. So then it'll tell you to go to this other code section, and then you jump to that code section, and then that code section has a reference to something else, and you just kind of go down this deep rabbit hole. So well, I do think you can kind of depend on legal professionals for that. I think just to get a general understanding, go through the definition, see what's applicable to you, kind of see what sections you think may apply to you, at least get a general understanding of the regs, and then go to the lawyers from there. But for yourself, at least give it a dry run here, take a look, kind of see what you can figure out, if anything, and come up with questions as you're going through this, just being like, well, I see there's advertising here, but has the department said anything? Just kind of take it from there, and just piece through it little by little. Don't try to consume this all at once. Just, again, what's applicable to you? What do you kind of see as relevant? And trying to take it from there. Because unfortunately, these regulations, well, at only 14 pages, they pack a lot in here. Within 14 pages, there's a lot going on in these regulations. I remember the first time I read through it, I was like, oh, wow. We're going to have a a robust regulatory regime in New York, that is for sure. So um, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully,
Yeah.
your listeners will be able to kind of get something out of this. But I do think kind of taking a little piecemeal here and there, trying to get an understanding of the regs is helpful, and not necessarily relying on third-party information right off the bat, right? Just, hey, at least try to give this thing a read, see what you can figure out, see what you can't, kind of jot down your questions and kind of take it from there.
Absolutely, yeah. Kind of starting from yeah, don't necessarily try to consume the whole thing at once, like trying to eat a giant sandwich all at once, right? You want to take it in bites and slowly consume it. And then also, as you said, just looking at the parts that really only do apply to you, because again, like people will look at this and just be like, oh, this whole thing applies to me. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can even parse this at all. I've gotten through the first paragraph and I'm already lost, right? And then as you said, once you have at least like it's not necessarily that you're gonna just read this and then you're gonna know exactly how to run within all the regulations that are out there, but more so that you're a little bit more educated, so you kind of have a better idea of where you're gonna head. And then also when you start talking to lawyers, you can actually be a little bit more educated about it and not just be told what to do and not really know why you're doing it, right? You actually have a little bit of justification behind you, and then you do want to go to the lawyers because, as you said, this is just one bill, right? And this bill interfaces with probably hundreds of other bills when you get down to all the different connection points that it can lead across. And so, really trying to figure out how to navigate all of those waters is really where you want to bring in a professional that not only knows how to read the bills, but also is familiar with them, familiar with how law kind of works in general, familiar with how the regulatory and all the different politicians and politicking works, right? Because that's all very important, right? Even though we have this bill that's laid out, it's still going to be interpreted slightly differently between different people, and that's why the definitions at least get a good grasp on it. But even then, you're going to have some minutiae between everything, so it can be kind of confusing. I just have one thing on here. So you said that New York uses the red and everything. Do other states not do that?
Some do, some don't. This is some will do it in they'll just kind of label it just as like a markup or something of that nature, or just call it the revised version or something of that nature, where they do have this kind of setup, right, where it's a green, red, or some sort of version, some sort of strike through. Others will just kind of do a black letter straight through and will not do the red and the green. So you just kind of have to figure out what is new, what isn't. It really is kind of across the board. Some will simply state like section XYZ is now removed. And you're just like, oh, okay, now I got to go to section XYZ, make sure that's out. So it really depends. It does kind of vary. And it'll vary, at the county and city level as well, kind of how they kind of publish their regulations. I do think what you see from New York, though, is relatively common. You will see kind of this layout where there's some sort of distinction between what is new, what isn't, and what's being removed. I think that's pretty general across the board.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, we will stop this. And for anybody that wants to go over the bill while we're going over it, I will link it in the description. And then let's see, get back here. So essentially, like we kind of speculated on it a little bit, but if you were to be maybe show two sides. If you were to be showing your hopeful side in terms of where you hope the regulations will be in the next 2 years, say maybe on the federal level at least, instead of getting down to the minutiae, because we could be here for hours if we were talking about each individual state. And then also, where do you think it actually will probably be in like 2 years? It's like not even necessarily just within the hemp space, but just your knowledge of law in general in terms of how slowly things move and all the issues that come up there.
For hemp in particular, I'm hopeful that we get some guidance from the FDA, right? I think that's the biggest one kind of holding up the industry now. Hopefully they say, yes, CBD is generally approved as safe. You can put it in food products, something of that nature. I'm very hopeful for that. And I do think, that is possible. That's in kind of the realm of possibility. That's not just wishful thinking there. The FDA may come out with some sort of positive statement. Realistically, what do I think is going to happen? I do think the FDA will say, yes, CBD can be used for human consumption, but they'll come up with some sort of regulatory framework for that. What that regulatory framework is going to look like and how they're going to implement it, I have no clue. I mean, I think it's going to be difficult for them, to say the least, to try to come up with this whole new regulatory regime. And as we kind of discussed, they may just give themselves more headaches because the way that they're currently going about it is a little different from what New York did. They're not just saying, hemp extracts. They're singling in on CBD. They personally have made CBD an issue. So maybe they do figure out CBD and we do have this regulatory regime. But then the next question is going to be, well, what about CBG? Does that fall in this regulatory regime? And then you're going to have some people saying, no, of course not. They've wanted CBG and they would have said CBG. And then you're going to have other people saying, well, no, let's just follow these regs. So I do think, unfortunately, for the foreseeable future, we're going to have this kind of cat and mouse game where regulations come out, we interpret them, but the marketplace just kind of evolves so quickly that those regulations don't necessarily keep up with what's active on the ground. So that's unfortunately kind of how I see things, at least for the foreseeable future, where we still have this gray. Another thing that I'm hopeful for is the federal legalization of cannabis. I do think, hopefully that comes down the pipeline. If that does in fact become the case, then I do think that'll help to clear things up, and the idea that we no longer have this controlled substance regime involved in the plant whatsoever. So DEA taken out of it completely with respect to regulating this plant. I think that will be helpful in moving the industry forward. But if the federal rollout of hemp regulations has been kind of any guidance as to what federal cannabis regulation will look like, it is going to be just beyond a shit show, right? That's going to be the only way to explain it. It is going to be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the first time I kind of did a public speaking engagement with respect to hemp, I was so excited. It was right after the 2018 Farm Bill came through, or maybe it was right before, but we thought it was going to come through. It was with a group of farmers, and I said, look, guys, in 3 to 4 years, you're not even going to need my business card anymore. Hemp is going to be considered no different than corn, to now an agricultural commodity. We're going to be good to go. Boy, was I wrong. It has just been absolutely a headache trying to navigate through these regulations. So I do think, hopefully, and I do think this will happen. Again, I don't know if it's going to be, tomorrow or 6 years from now, whatever it may be, but I do think we will see the federal legalization of cannabis. That will help to clear up some things on the hemp side, but it will also just create a lot more confusion. And on that, hopefully we don't have some sort of FDA guidelines where it's, well, cannabis CBD is this thing, but hemp CBD is this thing. And, we just kind of have this ridiculous additional hodgepodge. So given the fact that the industry as a whole is just kind of in its infancy, I do think these are just kind of growing pains that we're going to have to deal with. But I do think, just given the consumer demand for these products, they're going to have to figure it out. I mean, the FDA can't continue to bury its head in the sand. Because as you know, these CBD products are literally everywhere. Regular grocery stores sometimes have them, corner stores, gas stations, everywhere, online. It's incredibly easy to buy these products. So I do think eventually the marketplace will just kind of force the hand, so to speak. And I think we'll hopefully get some, thoughtful, thorough regulations where we're not trying to over-regulate, but we also understand the need for some regulations in place. And we just kind of, navigate the marketplace accordingly to say, again, don't make health claims, pretty much is the biggest one that I can say. Don't be telling consumers that, this is going to fix whatever disease they have, and just being truthful. Okay, this is either hemp derived or it's cannabis derived. It is known to have, these side effects. THC does have psychoactive effects. That is something consumers should know. And if you have a product that has both THC and CBD in it, they should have some sort of disclaimer explaining kind of, this may have adverse effects depending on how you take it. So I think hopefully that is kind of the direction that we're heading, where it's more consumer focused as far as the regulations are concerned, just kind of being more informative. I'm very hopeful for that. And I do think that is kind of a realistic goal. And I mean, beyond that, I keep thinking this is going to happen tomorrow, and it never seems to. Instead, we get some other kind of crazy regulation that throws a wrench into things. I mean, we just touched on it slightly, but the whole DEA interim final rule that came out, that was another curveball. So I think the regulation, as it continues to expand, and just the industry as a whole, we're going to be in this kind of forcing a lot of gray for probably the foreseeable future. But hopefully, 10 years from now, we'll all look back and say, hey, good thing we got that ironed out. Hopefully in 10 years, we're still not having these same conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. If in 10 years we were still having the same conversations, I think the market itself probably won't be able to survive that quite that long. Although, as you said, a lot of this is being market driven, which is really interesting. I mean, like comparing hemp to other products out there, or cannabis in general, other products out there, is kind of challenging because with hemp, right? Like with corn, if you're not a corn grower and not like in the corn industry, you can still grow corn. You don't need to get a license. You don't need to worry about anything. You can still grow corn. You're just not necessarily one of the main suppliers because you don't have the relationships. But if you're in the hemp industry, if you're not in the hemp industry, right, you can't just like go out and randomly plant some hemp and kind of test the waters. You have to go through all these steps, and it's not really super challenging, right? Like in New York State, for example, you have to pay a $500 licensing fee, and then you have to submit the application. And pretty much the only thing that's going to cancel you from getting your license is if you have a major drug felony, right? And that kind of stuff. So it's really it's not too bad, but it's also just it's yeah, the overcomplications of it. It's really interesting, and I also want to touch on, we touched on it in the CBD part, but the whole idea that this one chemical, right? It can be grown in a plant that even like you could technically have, as far as I understand, you could technically have a what would be technically considered a CBD plant, but grown under a marijuana license, right? And so therefore that CBD is being considered marijuana, even though it's exactly the same thing. Like that plant is technically a hemp plant, but it's legally a marijuana plant, and it just creates all this craziness. And also with THC, right? As long as it's below the 0.3% limit, it's derived from hemp, it's technically legal. But as soon as it's derived from marijuana, just by changing the name and changing the regulations slightly, it's a whole other ballpark to deal with. And it's just kind of crazy to have. And I think that's like really where most of the, as you said, most of the misunderstandings come in, right? People see cannabis and they see CBD that's in a dispensary, right? But they also see CBD that's sold in stores, and they kind of get all like wish-washed around it. Don't really understand the whole idea of it. And so I kind of want to like step away from the business side of things, and partly business, but really jump to like the consumer. What can an individual really do to go about trying to push these regulations forward? Like, could they send a letter to their representatives? Like, what kind of steps could somebody do? Because I feel like so many people feel like they're very powerless when it comes to regulations, right? They're like, oh, I don't really understand this. I don't really understand all the degrees of it or how it's done, right? And so what could somebody do to kind of help move this forward?
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, I do think speaking with your local politician, hey, that's the first place to start. Speak with your representative in Congress, speak to your senatorial representative, and just letting them know, hey, hemp is a big issue for me as a constituent. I want to see, uh, you know, I guess level-headed regulations in place. I currently do not like this current regulatory regime. I don't understand it. I think it's overly complicated, and we'd like to see something a bit more streamlined. And then just push it all the way down to the local, county level or city level, whatever it may be. So reach out to your state representatives, let them know this is an important issue for me. I would like to see these regulations change. I think the lower down the line you go, the more receptive they're going to be. I think your state representative is likely going to be a little bit more receptive than maybe your congressional representative. And I think at the county level, however that's set up, your county board of supervisors, whatever it may be, they're likely going to, be more open-minded when hearing from constituents. And just becoming actively involved, just either on your own or joining various advocacy groups. So there's plenty of groups out there that are promoting hemp and pushing hemp, just trying to find one that's right for you, whether it's a state-based or local group, or whether it's a national group, whatever it may be, trying to get involved with one of those. Um, and just becoming active within the community, within the space. There are a lot of people out there that are very pro hemp, that are very gung ho about hemp, and that are actively trying to move this legislation forward. And they can use all the help they can get. So if this is an issue that's important to you, just personally or from your business interests, whatever it may be, just help join that fight. Get involved in any way that you can. Every little bit helps, right? Sending a letter to your congressman, you never know what kind of impact it's going to have. Will that ever reach his desk? Maybe not. But if it does come across, or if enough letters are written, hey, they do start, checking them out. Hey, what is this whole hemp thing? So it is just kind of active engagement, letting them know, and then just moving it all the way down the line, right? Tell your little county supervisor, hey, I want to see more pro hemp legislation on our agenda lately. Just letting them know this is an issue for me. This is an issue for likely other constituents that aren't speaking out. And this is a product that can be very beneficial for our local community, but also at the national level as well. And I think if you kind of keep it within that space and keep it respectful, and don't, yeah, you're a bunch of idiots or something like that. Don't be too negative in your comments. And you don't need to necessarily even write some, like multi-page novel. You can just, sometimes a lot of these congressmen just shoot them a quick email, hey, hemp is a big issue for me. I'd like to see it addressed in these upcoming sessions, things of that nature, just to at least put it on the radar or a staffer's radar, whatever it may be. And whether you send one email a month, a year, weekly, whatever it may be, just kind of be consistent with it. And I think, the more and more people do that, eventually we'll start to see the change that we would like to see in the regulatory space.
Absolutely, yeah. Just each individual put together, as the more you can do, the further you'll get forward. And again, as you said, like starting with touching every single level, right? If you just purely try to go after the federal level, they're getting millions upon millions of letters, right, about all sorts of different things. And so for them to have to parse through all that stuff is kind of challenging. But then if you get it on like the view of your, as you said, like your county representative, then they can actually help you push it forward to the state representatives, and then they can help you push it forward to the federal representatives, right? So you can kind of go up that chain, and yeah, just really like sharing with people. And then also something I find is really helpful for people is just educating people, right? Talking about it, just talking about it in general, right? I mean, it's definitely a lot less now, but when I first was so I joined the industry right out of high school in 2014, and initially when I was talking about it, pretty much all the way up until 2018, a little bit after that, even then, anytime I talk to anybody about it, they're like, "Oh, you're just a stoner. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just saying pipe dreams and just putting all this random shit out there." And it's just kind of crazy. And I mean, I could even share somebody, like give them the nuclear launch codes, and they wouldn't hear me out, right? Just because it's like it's just this concept that just goes right over their head. But then as soon as the 2018 Farm Bill passed, all these people started coming to me and being like, "Oh, how can I get into the hemp industry? How can I do this?" It's like, well, if you had just listened to me like a year ago or 2 years ago, you would have gotten free advice, right? And it's just like this whole idea that the perceptions are changing dramatically. They're definitely still a little lost, right? I mean, I've found some people that aren't really quite on board, and actually I'm surprised each time that I do, because I'm so caught up in this bubble of the hemp space that I feel like everybody's educated about it and everybody knows everything about it. But then I step just a little bit outside the bubble and it's like, oh, hemp, I've heard of it, but I kind of know what CBD is. I don't really know what it is. I know that it comes from cannabis, but that's about it, and it's not THC. But that's like really as far as people kind of have in their knowledge base. So it's challenging, but going to your policymakers, going to the people that are making the regulations on every single level, and just telling them that you care about this, right? Then they're hopefully, if they're a good politician, or whether they have good intentions or they just want to be a good politician and get reelected, they should be listening to you because you're one of their constituents, right? So you should kind of move things forward. And so kind of on this note, for maybe somebody that's not already in the hemp space but is kind of thinking about getting into hemp, what advice would you give them? Because getting into hemp, right, like let alone reading the bills, which is a daunting task, but like just getting into the hemp space is a very daunting task because there's so many things going on and there's so many different levels to talk about, and you can get directly into the hemp space, or you can be more of an ancillary service, right, where you guys are like, you're a law firm, right, so you're targeting hemp specifically, but you can kind of work around that, or like banking services, they're kind of ancillary services, so they can be involved in hemp, but they don't just have to be in the hemp industry. But what kind of advice would you give to somebody that's maybe knowledgeable about hemp enough, but hasn't really taken the leap yet?
Before they do take that leap, kind of figure out what segment of the marketplace do you want to help service, right? As you noted, the hemp space is huge. There's a million different angles to approach it. So kind of see what works best for you, to say, okay, I'm not going to be a farmer, right? I'm not going to move out into some rural place and start planting. So that's kind of off the list. And then say, okay, do I want to make a product? Is that something I want to go through? Or is my avenue more branding? Do I know a lot about advertising and things of that nature? Or do you want to be some sort of broker, right? Getting seeds or CBD from, point A to point B, and just understanding the regulations that are applicable to seed sellers and things of that nature in different states, and kind of what a viable seed is and what it means to sell seed. Or going a completely different route and just doing finished products, right? Hemp shirts, hemp textiles, things of that nature. I mean, that industry is also starting to grow, and there's a bit more of a consumer demand for it as this plant continues to get out there into the public sphere. People say, hey, maybe I do want a hemp-based shirt or something like that. You always hear the joke, oh, can I smoke it? That's always kind of like the first thing that comes out with the wisecracks whenever it's like a hemp-based anything. Oh, I'm gonna smoke it, yada yada. But just really kind of find your niche. Just say, okay, this is this vast, huge marketplace. There's still plenty of opportunity in it. That is one thing I'd like to stress right now. This is by no means kind of a closed system. This is a wide open door and American capitalism at its finest. So, kind of just grab the bull by the horns, get in there, find a product or a service or a niche kind of marketplace that you would like to become involved in, and just kind of actively seek it. Learn as much as you can about the trade. Reach out to professionals, however they may be, get involved with trade organizations. And then once you kind of find your spot, just see if it works, and if it doesn't, you're coming a lot of headaches, the regulatory regime is just too much, hey, jump to the next. There really is just an incredible amount of opportunity in this space. And I do think it will be here for years, if not decades to come. This isn't something that all of a sudden is going to be dominated by a few market players. There's just so much that can be achieved with this plan, so many different angles that it can be, kind of taken on at, that I don't see it just being dominated by a few, market players here within the next 5 years or something of that nature, where you're going to have some mega conglomerate that's growing, selling, making creams, products, making t-shirts, all that stuff. Like it's just not there. So it really is a marketplace for the little guy where you can really shine in this kind of environment. I mean, on that note, due to the regulatory uncertainty, a lot of large corporations won't touch hemp, and that leaves a tremendous amount of opportunity for the little guy out there, so if they won't touch it, you will, get involved. If you like complicated regulations, hey, all the more the better, it's a place for you. So I do think anyone that's even slightly interested, I would poke around, kind of learn more about the plant, learn more about the products, and just take the jump. Try to get into the space. Everyone that was in the hemp space wasn't in it before. It's not like this is something that's been, I'm a generational hemp farmer or something like that. My grandpa did it. No, it's really everyone in the space is brand new. We all pretty much started from nowhere. It was just an interest in the plant and just kind of evolved from there. So I would just encourage anyone that's interested in the space, just push forward and try to find your niche.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point, that there's a lot of opportunity right there. And as you touched on, like major corporations, like we've heard like Coca-Cola talking about that they want to make a CBD product, but have they done it yet? No, because the regulations aren't really there. And since they are such a large company, they could probably deal with the legal defense and have to paying all that off, but they don't really want to go through that hurdle. They don't want to deal with that. And so, as you said, like the smaller companies that are more nimble and kind of like stand on their feet and change direction as the policies change, but then also are a little bit more risk taking and have less risk adverse than one of the bigger companies that has all these investments put in place, so that if they don't want to risk those investments. So it's definitely like a great industry for lots of people to get into. And so right before we wrap up here, is there anything else that you want to add?
Just thank you for this opportunity. I think this has been a great conversation. If anybody wants to, reach out, I'm always here to help. We'll put my contact info up on the link or whatever it may be. And would love to do this again. I think this was a great conversation. Hopefully the listeners and viewers will get something out of it. And if anything else comes up, I'm always here to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. We'll definitely put your contact information in the description so that people can also be possibly on the screen. So if somebody's really needing some legal advice, they know who to contact, and definitely we'll definitely have you on again, because as we know, this is ever changing and constantly evolving. And so in a year from now, or even maybe 6 months from now, whole new regulations are going to be out, hopefully, that won't be a total turnoff to people in the market. And so we'll have to kind of get a better update on where things are standing and kind of how to move forward from there. But thank you very much for joining us, Paul. It was a pleasure to have you.
All right, pleasure is all mine. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for joining us here on WhatCannaRadio, where we're on a mission to bring a dose of reality to your conversations about hemp. You can support this channel by checking out our sponsors in the description below, all while improving the wellness of yourself and your business. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and leave your questions and suggestions for future guests in the comments below. If you need another dose of reality right this moment, check out our video up here, or see what YouTube has to offer you over here or down below. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a mind-expanding day.